Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the stage from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Stacey Childress.
Everybody, it's nice to see you. I understand I'm the last Ed Talk of the conference. So, not sure what to make of that applause. Best for last. Thank you, Ben Rayer. I'll take it. So what I'm going to do this afternoon in the half hour we have together is take you very quickly through the strategy overview of what our team at the Gates Foundation is working on. I lead a team called Next Generation Learning, focused on the K-12 education space in the U.S. Now, I'm sure most of you know a lot about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. One thing when we talk about our U.S. Ed program sometime is that we kind of lose the context for what the overall foundation has as its mission and its aims. And Bill and Melinda have a point of view that they have brought to the foundation, which is that all lives have equal value. And so the work that they do in the U.S. and around the world is driven by that idea. In other parts of the world, what they noticed when they began doing their philanthropic work about 13, 14 years ago was that things like public health, access to clean water, and those kinds of things had an enormous impact on the gaps between the wealthy and low-income people in other parts of the world. When they began to focus on the U.S., after doing some work in libraries, they were stunned by the kinds of gaps that they saw that were entrenched, persistent, and pretty predictable by income and by race in terms of outcomes, opportunity, lifetime earnings, and those kinds of things, and track those all the way back into the pretty early grades of the education system. And so they committed over a decade ago that the work in the United States would be focused solely on public education issues in K-12 and both higher ed. So this work sits within the larger work of the foundation. It's about 30 or 40% of the overall giving of the foundation. But in the U.S., it's a really significant portion of the philanthropy that goes to K-12 education. So let me introduce you to my team, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're up to. Some of you in this room probably know at least one person, maybe two people on this slide, but sometimes I'm told that at the Gates Foundation it's hard to know who's doing what and who's connected to whom. So this is just a little cheat sheet for you on the Next Generation Learning team. Me, obviously, and then Scott Benson, Emily Dalton-Smith, Stephen Collar, Henry Hips, Megan Amrafel, and Robert Torres. Robert and Stephen haven't been here with us this week. They're off taking care of other business this week, but Scott, Emily, and Henry have been around, as has Megan, and you might have met some of them. So as we walk through, I'll try to remember to kind of put some names to some of the work we're doing so that those of you who are trying to figure out how our work fits together, that might help a little bit, as I said, as a cheat sheet as we go through the presentation. So first, I'll say this is some data about why we do what we do. Really interesting, I call this the aspiration to realization gap in the U.S. This is some really amazing data about 8th graders that's only a couple of years old. And if you ask 8th graders, when you ask 8th graders in this country whether or not they're going to college, 95% of them say, yes, I'm going to college. And if you break that information down by income, by race, there are almost no distinctions. So in 8th grade, all kids say, I'm going to college. I'm headed for college. 4 years later, something really stunning happens. That number is down to 70% who actually graduate from high school, and only 30% of the overall number are ready to succeed in college. It's a generous estimate. If you look at the ACT data for the class of 2012, just graduated last year, little over half of the kids in the country actually took the ACT last year. Of the kids that took it, it's a big sample, only a quarter of them scored on all sections of the ACT exam at a level that would predict being able to carry a C or better average their freshman year in college. So within 4 years, we've got an aspiration to realization gap, which 95% of the kids say, I'm going. Less than 30% are actually ready. And what we know beyond that number is that only about 8% of kids in the lowest income quartile in the country that actually go to college finish. So from 95% to 8% in about 8 short years. So we think we can do better than that as a country. And so the work that drives the Gates Foundation education strategy, the work that drives our team, gets us out of bed in the morning, is thinking every day about how we can help make the aspirations that kids have in the 8th grade more of a reality more quickly. So these are numbers that many of you probably know. We're probably almost tired of hearing them, but it's always good to remind ourselves when we think about what solutions there might be, that the NAEP reading and math scores over about 40 years have stayed virtually flat. There's been a little bit of an uptick in certain periods here and there. Meanwhile, we've doubled the per pupil education spending over that period of time, and that's obviously an inflation-adjusted rate. So twice the money for about the same results over many decades. And so part of our motivation on our next generation learning team is to say, how can we actually make a big difference on these two curves, the performance and the cost curve? Are there some ways that with a different way of organizing instruction, a different way of supporting teachers and students, a different set of school models and tools, we might start to see costs coming down rather than up, and performance going up rather than flat? So just a little bit of our rationale. Now here's why we care about this. Isn't he cute? He's really cute. The 2025 goal for the education strategy at the Gates Foundation. So by 2025, our goal is that 80% of students graduate from high school ready to succeed in college. Now, the number I told you a bit ago was a little less than 30%. So the challenge of going from 30% to 80% is massive, incredibly aspirational, perhaps unattainable, a goal nonetheless that gets you out of bed in the morning. But the thing that makes it very real for us, you know, that 2025 goal has been on the books since 2007 or 2008. And this year it occurred to us that these aren't some unknown, fictional, abstract children that no one's ever met that we're talking about as the class of 2025. The class of 2025 is in kindergarten right now. So we've got one cycle from kindergarten through high school graduation to try to really move the needle for kids, help close that aspiration and reality gap for kids. So how many of you actually have in your families either your own children or your nieces and nephews, grandchildren that are, say, between pre-K, you know, 3- or 4-year-old and, say, 2nd grade? Right, so those are the kids we're talking about. It's those kids. You know these kids. It's their friends. It's their less advantaged peers in other parts of your city. That's who we're talking about by 2025. So for us, big question, how do we accelerate the rate of improvement? There's been a little bit of uptick, by the way, on things like NAEP, on things like the ACT, but it's very small, really incremental. The last data I ran on the ACT trend is we get to 80% college at a college-ready indicator about 65 years from now. It's just too long. Just too long. We can do better than that. So that's the challenge we're working on our team, as all of the college-ready team is, but we're really focused on acceleration on our team. What can we do to help really change these trajectories? So this is just a quick statement that we use to keep ourselves grounded as a team, so I thought I'd share it with you. We have a vision that one day every student in America will experience personalized learning as the norm rather than the exception, because it's happening today. In fact, great teachers without any technology at all are pulling this off day in and day out, sometimes in very challenging conditions, sometimes in very large class sizes, sometimes in much more hospitable conditions for personalized learning, smaller class sizes, more resources, more adults per kid. But we think that shouldn't be an exception, that as a rule, the system should be able to deliver for every single kid, every single day, exactly what they need in order to close that aspiration and reality gap. That the system we have today that does its very best to serve all kids about as well as it can and kind of keep people moving at about the same rate, depending on what age they are, isn't doing it for us. And so this shift, certainly we're not creating this shift at the Gates Foundation. We're working alongside lots of partners who had this insight long before we did, and trying to support their work, learn from them, and help them get better faster and grow and serve more kids. So one reason we're anchored, a big reason that we're anchored on this personalized learning idea, the argument we make is that there's plenty of evidence over the years in pretty rigorous studies that with one-to-one live instruction on a mastery-based model with an expert teacher in randomized controlled trials, you get outstanding, actually astounding results relative to traditional group classroom instruction. The result is actually, it's called a 2 sigma result in the literature. And basically what that means is a kid that has, or a group of kids that have mastery-based one-to-one instruction from a master teacher perform on average the same as the 98th percentile of students in traditional instruction. So that's a 2 sigma finding. And the question isn't, can we do it? Because sure, it's been done over and over and over in studies that are randomized and replicable. The challenge is we can't afford and do not have 50 million teachers to be able to deliver that kind of instruction to 50 million public school students day in and day out. We don't have them, we're not going to have them. So how can we achieve similar results sometime soon for students at scale in a way that's replicable and affordable and producible by normal human beings quickly, affordably? So that's the problem we're working on. We believe that technology is a component. It's not the answer. It's not going to solve this problem, but as a way of extending the capacity, extending the reach, improving the conditions that teachers are working in that are trying to do this day in, day out, we believe that technology can be a big support. So educators have known for a long time one size doesn't fit all. In fact, as I said, the best teachers are working to do this every single day in their classrooms, and all teachers really want to do it and struggle with the context that they're in, with the environment that has been created around them to really deliver that. At the same time, expectations are rising. It's not only Common Core, but it is Common Core, and the science standards are coming, and just the kinds of expectations that society has for our schools now are growing and growing and growing. So the notion that we could, as a country, get 80% of our kids through graduation and ready for college from a 30% reality today is an enormous lift in expectations. So expectations are rising, and importantly, it's not just that today's students have to be ready for the jobs of the future. We actually, as old people, have to rely on them to create the jobs of the future that don't even exist yet. And that is not just being able to perform well on some basic skills tests. It's a whole range of kind of deep conceptual understanding, critical thinking, the ability to work with each other, the ability to identify and solve problems together. All of that is now just a common expectation of what we need in our schools. So we believe what we've got isn't going to get us there. We've put together this very high-level list. We're calling them principles. I wouldn't really call them design principles of a school per se. For us, they're principles of investment. What are we looking for when we say we're looking for personalized learning stuff to invest in? What kinds of characteristics do they share at a very high level? For us, it means it's student-centered, whether that's a school model or a piece of content or a tool or a solution, that it has the student at the center, and every day working hard to meet the learning needs of that student and all of the other students around them. Really high expectations, so committed to the idea that all kids can get there with the right kinds of supports, with the right kinds of knowledge and skill, that every kid can get ready to be successful in college and career, and self-pacing and mastery-based credit. There are a lot of people in the room that I see that I know are working on this really hard day in and day out. How do you create an environment in which, as soon as a student learns something and can demonstrate it, they can move on. They can move on to whatever they need to learn next. They can go deeper in the thing they're working on, but something that really drives their interest and they'd like to go deeper, that they have the flexibility to do that, and understanding that students will be doing that at different times and at different paces from each other. How do you create those kind of mastery-based, self-pacing environments? Blended instruction, so this is where the technology comes in. We believe it's almost impossible to imagine at scale the kinds of student-centered, high expectation, self-paced, mastery-based credit environments without the help of really powerful technology that is focused very tightly on what kids and teachers need to succeed and is built around those use cases rather than the latest, greatest, cool, shiny thing that might catch the eye of entrepreneurs and investors, but things that are really focused on meeting the use case of personalized learning. That's where our focus is. We believe these new models have to really preference an increasing amount of student ownership as students progress through their learning paths. That by the time they graduate from high school, students need the skills, they need to have the tools, and they need to have the confidence and the information to manage their own learning. We know, and some of you know because you've been involved in these great school networks, that some of the really high-performing charter management organizations, this is their next challenge, the challenge they're working deeply on, because they've created amazingly structured learning environments for students that help get them ready for college by the numbers. And it's a very tough challenge for those students then to get to college and have to figure out kind of on their own how to manage their own learning, how to get what they need from counselors, how to get what they need from their professors. And so for us, that's now is a core principle of what we're looking for. What does this technology, what does this school model do to help students over time take control of their own learning and have the skills to do that? As these models get built out, again, whether it's a technology or a school model, we are focusing hard on financial sustainability. That graph that I showed at the beginning, where costs have been rising over the last 40 years, sort of unabated, while outcomes are flat. The schools that we invest in, we, along with other funding partners, help folks get started, do the startup capital that's necessary to get something off the ground or do a conversion. But our requirement as a funder is that there's a plan in place that by sometime in the 4th year of operation, that school becomes sustainable on its public per pupil revenue, rather than building models that are so overbuilt that we can't sustain them over time or at scale. So that's a key principle for us. And then scalable. If something works really well, we want it to be designed with the intent that once that's proven, it can grow pretty rapidly to serve more students, because we've got that big goal that we're trying to hit and a big gap from where we are today. So just wanted to give you a sense of that when we talk about personalized learning, it means a whole lot of things to a lot of people, and obviously it means more deeper things than this to us, but at a very high level, those are the key principles that we're looking for. So you could invest in, we have colleagues in the room that are investing in different ways than we are against that goal, and with that insight about personalized learning, there are lots of things you could do if you were a foundation. So we took some time, I'm just coming up on my 3rd year at Gates in a couple of weeks. We took some time over the first several months to figure out really how we wanted to deploy resources against that goal and against the challenge we saw in the field. And we have settled pretty quickly on 3 investment areas, and our task over the last couple of years is just to get smarter and smarter and smarter as fast as we can about the work in each of them. So I'll talk you through just quickly through them. One, personalized learning schools. So we are supporting directly a number of schools that are reinventing themselves or starting from scratch with those principles in mind. And I'll tell you a little bit more about each of these, and this one in particular as we move through, to give you some detail of what that means. But for us, only investing in policies or only investing in content and tools, to us, didn't quite feel right. This work, regardless of whether you have great policies or great technology, the hard work of personalized learning happens every day in classrooms with real teachers and real students using real tools, trying to make this work. And we thought, if we're not in that part of the space, if we're not in that game, we're not going to be plugged into what the real needs are. We're not going to be helping create this new ecosystem of schools that might be quite different from one another, but are focused on serving every kid every day. And we also didn't see very many of them. So when I started 3 years ago, there was a lot of talk already about blended learning and blended schools, and it was a movement, and maybe we should have a convening to kind of bring the movement together. I thought, wow, a movement, that sounds like something fun, that would be great. And so I started going to, there's conferences like this, right? You could go to one of these every couple of weeks if you wanted to. So for a little while I did, to see what was going on out there. And it sure felt like a movement, because every conference now had this track of panels that was about blended instruction or personalized learning or disruptive innovation, how technology, my friend Michael Horn, how technology was going to change education. And it was all those panels and all those conferences, and it was about 5 guys. Like over and over and over on all the panels, it was 5 guys. Now these were really smart guys. They had built amazing early stage schools and models. And to me, I was scared to death. So I thought, wow, if there's only 5 of these, we got a long way to go. So rather than kind of push our money, to the middle of the table and say, we're going to bet on these 3 of the 5 early ones and help them go to scale, I said, man, we need lots more of these. Because the way we're going to learn more quickly about how some of these patterns of constructing personalized learning environments will happen is by having more innovators working on that same challenge at the same time, so that we get cycle times that are much more quickly and folks can learn from each other. So we're investing in startup schools. We are supporting districts and CMOs with traditional school models who want to make the shift. So we're helping support that financially. Then we're also trying to support other organizations that are part of this portfolio that help schools either start up or make the transition, right? So consulting firms, the work that Michael does at Innosight, just in terms of knowledge generation and dissemination, and some of the other digital promise for us is an investment in this category. We're supporting the League of Innovative Schools. So new schools, conversions, and then the kind of intermediary capacity, to use kind of a wonky term, that can help support that growing field of schools and school operators. The digital content and tools portfolio for us is exciting, but also a bit of a conundrum, so I'll tell you about that. We think in this bucket, for us, it's things that the schools that I described, it's the stuff they need to serve kids well. We believe in markets. We believe that competition and lots of options and choice will get us to higher quality solutions more quickly. So we like to see lots of innovators working on the same hard problems, giving teachers, kids, families, school leaders lots of choices for the kinds of digital content and tools they need to operate these models. The conundrum for us is we are a foundation. We're not a venture capital firm. We're not a private equity firm. And we clearly can provide risk capital to nonprofits. That's what foundations are for. That's their purpose. But we also know that about 90% of the content and tools market in ed tech is for profit. So we can't ignore it. We don't think we can ignore it. And we don't actually think it's a particularly powerful strategy to just try to fund directly nonprofit competitors to the for-profits in the space. So it's a fun intellectual challenge, but it's one that we have to kind of learn really fast. We've made some smart moves there. We've made some mistakes there. We're just trying to get smarter and smarter. So I'll give you an example here. I would say Khan Academy for us, so that organization is in our portfolio. When we met Saul back in the summer of 2010, he had 50,000 users, cumulative. So from the time he began tutoring Nadia, his niece, all those years ago, to the time we began talking with him about a grant in summer of 2010, he had 50,000 users. Today, Saul has a little over 6 million users. Now, I would submit that it could be that Khan Academy is going to be an amazing kind of breakthrough performance learning tool over time, and that outcomes are step change above what other kinds of tools produce. We'll see. But what the Khan Academy investment did, in addition to elevating Khan Academy as a model, was really start a completely different conversation in the field about what was possible. Possible in classrooms, possible in technology. Let me say that differently. It didn't start the conversation. The conversation was underway. It really accelerated it. It threw gasoline on that low-burning fire. For us, that's not a bad investment in a particular point solution, if you will. But we want more and more of our work to be different kinds of investing. How do we shine a spotlight on gaps in the marketplace that are really important to kids and teachers, but for some reason, either because of the time horizons it'll take to build a business there, the size of the investment that's needed to really do the R&D, whatever it might be, for some reason the market's just not responding quickly enough. How can we play a role there? And again, we don't think it's just investing in nonprofits to fill that need, but trying to catalyze innovation in the commercial and nonprofit sector against those challenges. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. And so we're doing more and more of that as we go along. And then for us, the enabling environment, which for us is both policy and kind of public will and public conversation, as well as infrastructure, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a sec, are the big pieces of that. And the hypothesis there is we can have all the great tools in the world, we can have some really terrific proof point schools, but if the policy environment doesn't come along to support the innovation and make it possible that once some of these breakthrough models start to really prove themselves, we can imagine some of the policy sets in some states making it really difficult for some of these models to really get the traction they need. So we're keeping an eye on that. We don't do a ton of work there. We just kind of stay connected to it. When we see an opportunity, we'll do a little bit. So let me give you kind of an example in each one of these just to make it a little more concrete. Here we go. Let me get to the examples. So we've got some school folk in the room who are part of our Next Generation Learning Challenges. We, last year, put out an RFP for people who wanted to, like I always say, people who think they have a school in them. You know, teams that say, wow, we're gonna start a school whether anybody backs us or not. We've got this great idea, we're gonna get it going. Whether it's a charter school or a district school, because some districts have an opportunity for folks to open up new schools as the residential patterns are shifting around. So we put out a call, an RFP that had a set of design principles that were a little different than the ones I've showed you earlier because we've learned a lot since then. We got 101 proposals from 101 teams that said we want to open a school like this next year. We were blown away because remember, we knew 5 guys and by then it probably had grown to 8 people we knew that were really doing this. We couldn't have found 101 people to talk to about opening a new school and whether or not they were a good fit for us in 10 years. But this mechanism for us really shined a spotlight on something that we knew the field cared about, something that was consistent with our investment strategy, and said, anybody out there doing anything interesting, here's the application. Importantly, the review panels that select winners, if you will, of these challenges, it's not just Gates Foundation people. So we build review panels, a lot of you in the room are on them, that have experts from around the sector, other school leaders, thought leaders, policy leaders, many other foundations participate in the selection with us, even though they don't have money in it, because we think that makes the process a lot stronger than simply having the Gates Foundation's perspective on that review. So 20 schools won launch grants. Some of them are up and running this year. The rest of them open this fall. We're so excited about it. That group is now kind of operating as a community of practice, helping each other. Ben Rayer's here from Touchstone. He's part of this group. His school is up and running this year. And again, there are 19 others. All of them have plans to open multiple schools over time once they work out the kinks and if they're successful at really figuring out the model. We're doing more of these this year. So there's an open challenge right now, deadline April 22nd, and another deadline in December for school teams that want to raise their hands and say, I've got a school in me and I want to build one like that. But we're also doing planning grants this year, because what we found in that 80 or so that didn't quite make the cut is there's probably a pretty good idea in here somewhere. 6 weeks wasn't enough time to really bang it out and make a compelling case for it. So planning grants for at least or up to 30 teams to spend a year getting their plan together. Then when we run this challenge again next year, which we will, hopefully many of them will be ready to move to launch. So we're really excited about this. We're excited about the amazing entrepreneurs we're seeing that are opening these schools. They are all over the country. They're coast to coast. I didn't put the map slide in. And they all have plans, if successful, to open more schools. Now, really important component, every school that gets funded through this challenge process enters the same evaluation design. And so over several years, an evaluation that kicked off this year with the first several schools that opened will run, and as new schools come into the pipe, into the family, they'll enter the evaluation protocol. And so the same set of evaluation criteria led by RAND over a number of years on all of these school models. So they're going to be different from each other, but we've got the same set of outcomes that we'll be measuring them against and doing some of the qualitative work to make sense among the models. So I'm really excited about that. I think the field as a whole will be better 5 and 10 years from now when we all have more information, not just through this mechanism, but through all of the other things people are doing that are terrific, that give us more information about what's working and what's not, and really importantly, why. Why some things work and some things don't. All right, so I'm gonna move quickly here because we're running out of time. On the digital content and tools space, I mentioned we are trying to shift a little bit. We'll still do some breakthrough investments in things like Khan Academy if we run across them, and we'll be keeping our eyes out for them. But more and more you will see designs like this. We spent months with a number of our program officers and some outside help talking to teachers, school leaders, literacy experts at universities, saying, in this new world of personalized learning, what do you wish you had that you can't get? And we started with the schools and teachers and school leaders, and they said, we're starting to see the math stuff come along. We're really struggling to find great literacy projects. There are a few, there aren't as many, and we need more options. And so we basically kind of did a business requirements exercise with lots of folks and said, wow, what would a great product like that look like? We put that out as an RFP with a structure for companies at different phases of development, whether brand new idea, new team, early stage company with a little bit of something that they need to push forward and need access to customers to test their products with, or more established players that say, hey, wait a minute, that list of things I do. I don't know why those schools don't know I do it. How about pay attention to me? So we launched the Literacy Courseware Challenge a few months ago, and same setup. We're running it inside the foundation, but we have the same setup in terms of review panels. The Gates Foundation isn't picking all the winners of this. We've got panels that'll do a first cut. We didn't know what honestly, because it's a product challenge, right? We didn't know what we would see. We expected maybe 30 or 40 proposals. The contest closed 2 weeks ago. The application window closed 2 weeks ago. We got 151 applications from teams that said, I can either do all or a piece of that challenge you put out. About 20 of them, 30 of them were non-responsive, the generous way to say it. Actually really weren't aligned with the criteria, but 120 of them were at some level. And so now that set of proposals is going through this review process. It'll get narrowed down, but everything viable will stay in. And then a group of pilot schools have agreed to test this stuff next school year, and we won't ask them to test certain things. They'll have access to this library of possible tools they'd like to use, and they'll pick. So a lot of stuff's not going to get picked. That's okay with us. We think that's how markets work. But a lot of stuff will get picked. Common evaluation run by SRI that'll test the products with a pre and post test in the schools that are using them. And that's all that data will become completely public. We'll be totally transparent about what happened. The people that applied understand that that's the setup. So we think for us, we're really intrigued by this. We'll see how this goes. It's a first time out for us on this particular model. We're going to see how it works, but I think it's probably a pretty good bet you'll see a lot more of this kind of activity from us in the content and tool space. One more thing to mention to you. This is in the enabling environment area for us. I mentioned policy is a piece of it, but for us, infrastructure is a piece. So about 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, a group of us that were on the same team at the foundation just started talking to lots of people out in the field. Like, what's a big barrier to really getting application innovation going in a way that actually doesn't make it harder every time a teacher or a student adopts a new technology tool? Because what we learned as we went through this process was all the different data formats, the different data exchange protocols, every great new tool that the most forward-thinking teacher or the most forward-thinking school adopted actually made it harder for them to get all of that stuff to work well together, to get the data coming in and out of them to be usable and easy to execute for teachers and for school administrators. And the more we looked, the more we worried that there wasn't likely to be a market solution at scale to the data exchange and interoperability challenge at the same time as states and then eventually districts were going to be spending significant money through Race to the Top. And it looked as if maybe proprietary versions of this would get built over and over and over, further exacerbating the challenge. We'll do this very rarely. We may never do anything like this again, but I'm really proud we did it 2.5 years ago, because In Bloom launched a couple of months ago. It's got customers. Those data exchange protocols are open. It's open APIs. It's got application partners. It's got call them draft dashboards that can be improved over time because they're open source. The source code for the data exchange and single sign-on and identity management will all be open source by sometime in the fall, so others can pick that up and use it. It's a public asset, a public good. And what it has the potential to do is prove the use case that with lots of different content and tools that generate rich information about student learning, having access to lots of existing information about what kids know and are able to do, that the kinds of learning environments that could rise up to serve kids better every single day should be closer in from a time horizon rather than farther out. The only problem In Bloom helps solve is data integration and application interoperability. So it takes all the dollars that are being spent on that out in the sector and gives people another option for a very cheap way of solving that once and moving all of that money, all of the attention that gets paid in school IT departments and in teachers' days as they're signing into 14 things, moves every resource, money, time, and attention to things that matter more for kids, things that matter more to the learning moment. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. It's still in pilot. It was a big bet. It's controversial. We understand it. We knew it would be. It was controversial from the day we got approval for it. But it is a big infrastructure bet. We'll see what happens. I don't think we'll do many more of them, but I could be wrong. We could stumble across another problem like this that we think is worth solving in this way. So I think that's it. I have 20, 19, 18, 17 seconds left on my clock, which I can't believe. So why don't I take a question or two? Is that okay, timekeepers? Because I know I'm between you and whatever happens last at the conference. So yes, sir. Yeah. Great, so terrific. So the question was, on the digital literacy challenge, because it's the only example I gave, what other kinds of things are we thinking about in the digital content tool space? So it's a great question. So I'll say first, we actually don't yet, although we will sometime in the next several months, have some master plan over the next few years for what other kinds of challenges we might roll out. So I'll answer your question in a different way. So we think that our capital is best deployed against very specific use cases, and rather than spreading it across a little bit of everything. And so we're really interested in a couple things. One are obviously the digital and math kinds of supports that those personalized learning schools need to work really well. We see lots of activity in the market. We're trying not to create weird market distortions, but we'll still do a little stuff there. We're really interested in the potential of web scale learning. I don't know how many of you saw Zoran Popovich's presentation. He was just before Michael Horn this afternoon. So we funded Zoran out of the University of Washington. He has spun out. He's got this really very interesting platform that can make it possible for content owners that are either flat digital or text to convert very quickly to an adaptive education model with their existing content without having to rebuild all that adaptive engine stuff every single time. So what we are interested in about that is that across lots of different kinds of content, with Zoran's particular point of view about thinking about the kind of underlying logic that a platform like that needs, we think it's incredibly high potential for, again, web scale learning. Every single kid that uses it makes it better for every other kid. So we're really interested in those kinds of things. If there's deep R&D investment needed to get something to a place where commercial investors will pay attention to it, we might do some of that. So that's one way to think about it. The other is if we come across a team that has done something in another industry for workforce training or in the military and has produced that 2 Sigma outcome with some kind of technology product and are willing to say, we'll do a phased development process whereby at each phase, if we're not producing outcomes that get us on the way to 2 Sigma plus, everybody stops and shakes hands and go home, we're really interested in that. Because there's no DARPA for education. And so we don't have a ton of money to put towards that, but it's a gap in the capital market in education, and it's not clear yet where funding for those kinds of things is going to come from. So that's enough. So for us, breakthrough results with a proven team from another industry or another domain, and then the web scale kind of learning stuff, which includes search and discovery, so stuff like Guru is really interesting to us. And then somebody, okay. He changed his mind, so you.
Related to that last point, the question about brain science, have you looked at brain science and its application against this challenge, and have you thought about funding anything in that area?
The brain science itself, or a challenge that uses brain science to become a product?
I'm thinking more specifically about what's been found in brain science and how it can bear on these challenges in which I did.
Thank you. So this conference last year, I got invited to this dinner with like 10 people or something, and I just thought, oh, I'll go to that dinner. It looks like interesting people. But it turns out it had this protocol where each person got to ask some other person at the table a question. No, you could only ask one. Once you were asked, that was it. Like you were out. So you got your question, and then nobody else could ask you a question. That part I like, because I actually don't like talking to people very much, it turns out. And so I had to say, and so Bror, I see you. I'm going to come to you next. Bror was at the dinner, and with just the nicest, politest Bror, big smile, he said, Stacy, let me ask you a question. Why doesn't the Gates Foundation use learning science when it makes its investments in content tools? I thought, oh, yeah, why don't we? Thanks, Bror. And I probably rambled around for a little while and maybe eventually gave you an answer, but what it did is have my team and I and others at the Gates Foundation start tapping Bror and other people in the learning sciences, in the big data field, to start helping us get smarter about all of this. So you'll start to see more of that from us. The literacy challenge has a whole bunch of information that comes right out of the body of literature about what it means to be to learn to be a great writer and a reader, and that's built into the RFP. But you will see more and more of that from us. You won't see us investing in research in brain science or cognitive science, but trying to use that to inform product development, yes. All right, one last question in the back.
This is Rahul from Appraiser. Just wanted to ask you about your international efforts on some of the courseware, integrating different challenges internationally.
It's a good question. So at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that the Gates Foundation does an enormous amount of international work. In fact, 60–70% of the giving of the foundation happens internationally, but just about none of that is in education. So our education work is focused in the United States. What's starting to happen, we're part of a couple of networks with other countries at the country level and also at the city level, where more dialogue about what's going on across countries is happening. That dialogue's been happening without us. We're now beginning to participate in it. And so while currently I have nothing to point to that is an answer to your question, I think that's another area in which we just need to get a whole lot smarter, be a whole lot more active in the learning conversation that's going on globally about these issues. Whether or not we ever actually do anything internationally with our funding versus participate and learn and potentially try to get great entrepreneurs who are creating great things that are working in other countries to come here is unknown because it's a path we're just starting to take. All right, so we are out of time. Thanks for the good questions and thanks for hanging in at the end of the day.